Good afternoon and welcome to the show. I'm Jim Flyzik. During today's show, we will discuss best practices with data center consolidation in the federal government. With me today on the show are Neal Shelley, the lead for data center consolidation program at the U.S. Army, Frank Konieczny, the Chief Technology Officer of the U.S. Air Force, Paul Christman, Vice President, Dell Software Public Sector, Adam Clater, the Director of Cloud Strategy, Public Sector at Red Hat, and Steve Wallo, the Systems Engineering Manager at Brocade. We're going to talk data center and progress being made in data centers. Let's start with Frank over at the Air Force. Frank, can you give us some examples that demonstrate some of the progress you're making with your efforts in data center consolidation?
Yeah. There's two ways of doing data center consolidation. There's actually forklifting servers to another data center, right, which seems to be a predominant way of doing things quickly. Mm-hmm. However, the Air Force has gone down a different path. We've gone down the path of looking at a methodology to migrate applications. And so, for instance, Hill Air Force Base has been the test bed for a lot of this already. Mm-hmm. They've migrated 400 applications already. Wow. Into a server farm of 55 servers right now. They've actually developed an 11-step process to actually do this. So it's an organized, structured approach to actually getting things done. And that's where we're progressing down to, is because we want to be able to do a standard way of migrating applications accordingly into any cloud data center whatsoever, be it the DISA Cloud Center or a commercial cloud center.
Yeah, terrific. It makes a whole lot of sense. I mean, we wouldn't really be accomplishing a whole lot if we moved stuff from one location to another location, but it's the same stuff. I mean, you want to get some modernization, virtualization, and
right, and that's the
improve
path we actually went down rather than just forklifting, because forklifting doesn't get you anywhere.
Right, right. Excellent point. Neal Shelley at the U.S. Army, what are some of the give us some examples of some progress you're seeing being made over at the Army.
The Army's been very aggressive. We've found over 1,200 data centers by the OMB definition.
Okay.
And we've closed 227 of those so far. There's another 41 we've closed, but we wait until we get a general officer or SES signature on a closure report to count it. So we've had a lot of progress. The original guidance was to improve your security posture, to gain efficiencies, and to control costs. And by closing a lot of those smaller data centers, we certainly are increasing our security posture and gaining efficiencies.
Yeah, terrific. And we're going to come back when we talk benefits a little bit more to hear about some of the benefits you see being achieved in some of these efforts. Paul Christman, tell us how Dell positions to support your customers and the kind of examples and progress you see being made.
Well, Jim, the broad offerings from Dell as a corporation span both software, the group that I manage, as well as obviously the hardware, but also the services side of things. All three areas of the company are contributing to the public sector's modernization and consolidation of data centers. Some of the comments made earlier about modernization of applications, that's where Dell comes in. We're assisting DoD customers as well as intelligence agency customers and civilian agencies to do all of these things. But the main thing that we're seeing is the componentizing, I don't know if that's a word, but to be able to disassemble IT and then reassemble it as components so that it can be delivered more quickly. An example of that would be identity services provided in a consolidated data center or a modernized data center. Those sorts of things just aren't possible if you've got all these disparate, dislocated, and fragmented data centers.
Yeah, good. What I'm hearing, and it makes a whole lot of sense, is, in the early days, this data center consolidation, everybody was thinking, okay, how do we just close data centers? But what I'm hearing is that it really takes some planning up front and putting in methodologies and processes in place. So you're not just moving a data center, you're actually modernizing and improving processes along the way. Adam Clater of Red Hat. When I think of Red Hat, I think of open source, I guess, is the first thing comes to mind. And tell us how Red Hat's positioning and working with the customers in the data center, virtualization and data center consolidation kinds of issues.
Absolutely. So I think it's very clear that consolidation is taking place throughout the government space, right, which is very exciting for all of us. What we advise is a fairly standardized methodology. Standardize your processes and procedures internally, move to a virtualization, move to some sort of infrastructure as a service as a next step, and then I think the pinnacle statement would be if you can move to a platform as a service, right? But all of these things take that initial standardization of processes and procedures. What's great is that we're seeing participation in these consolidation efforts from industry and government, right? So standardization around Linux, standardization around the Docker project, around really encapsulating workloads, moving them to the appropriate places. In 2004, as a customer, you were probably looking for applications that were RHEL certified, right? I want to make sure my app's certified on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. In 2014, you're now looking to say, all right, well, is this going to be certified on my OpenStack implementation? Is this going to be certified on my platform as a service implementation? And industry and government are really, really walking down that road together, which is great.
Yeah, I think I've become a major advocate of open source everything. I mean, over the years, as time has gone on, and you have it, especially when you have the chance to sort of like start over with a clean slate, as opposed to being locked into proprietary kinds of approaches. Steve Wallo at Brocade, can you talk a little bit about some of the areas where you see progress being made and how Brocade supports its government customers and moving forward in these areas?
Sure, definitely. So just to add on to a couple of the things that we talked about already, deciding what you want to move. You have 1,000 apps. Well, which ones do you keep? Which ones do you move? From an infrastructure perspective, we want to make sure we can get visibility into that. So the industry as a whole, at least from the networking side, has been able to give you more tool sets to provide that visibility inside there. And the other piece, you always tell the story that if you had a data center manager and he goes into a data center and something happens and he just kind of goes away for 10 years. And then when he comes back, what he'll see was that all the servers have been virtualized, all the storage has been virtualized. But from a networking perspective, it's the same stuff you saw before. He's all happy because it's the exact same gear. The networking world hasn't changed so much to allow you to do things like cloud and data center consolidation. And in the last maybe year, we're really starting to see that the network's providing those services that tie into the virtualization world. So the network's almost hidden to a certain point because it understands more than just the network itself. And it's more of a tool for the business as opposed to the business being able to, or being limited into what it can actually do because of what the network allows.
Right. Right, very good. Well put. I like those ideas. Let's talk about benefits. I mean, we're obviously we're doing data center consolidation. We're doing it for a reason. It's not just something to do. We're doing it because we're anticipating positive outcomes coming out the other end. So let's talk about some of the benefits you see. What are some of the benefits you see coming from these efforts? Let's start with Neal Shelley over at Army. Neal, what are some of the benefits you're seeing by going through this process?
Well, I've told the previous CIO that the biggest benefit I saw immediately was knowing where all the data centers in the Army are.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Because 20, 30 years ago, there were very few data centers. They were large, easily identified, and pretty much you knew how much money you were spending on them.
Sure.
But now a smart sergeant and a $2,500 credit card can generate what the OMB calls a data center in a matter of a week.
Sure.
So by finding out where these facilities are, we're going to be able to better manage them and get some control over the cost, what the spending is on those data centers.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Thinking back to my days running Treasury, we did have that same issue. Every now and then we discover these locations that were now connected to our network. We didn't know were out there. Frank, how about over at the Air Force? What do you see as some of the biggest benefits that you believe you're accumulating by going through these efforts?
Well, besides looking at seeing what the data centers are, we're actually determining now what all the applications are. And sometimes you have the same name of an application in different data centers and you assume they're the same, but they're really not. And so we're finding that as we look at all the applications across, we rationalize them and determine what's really we want to go forward with. Also, which is another benefit, is that as we do this, we're actually freeing up airmen to actually do mission. And you'll see our focus is more on the airmen should be doing mission, and we should outsource, if you will, all the data center to somebody else.
Okay. So yes, it's giving you that decision making as to what really is our core business that we need to focus on, and what things can we perhaps be provided to us. We'll talk a little bit about that because, to me over time, and we'll get to it here in the show, the idea of data center consolidation, cloud strategy, managed service strategy, infrastructure as a service, they're all sort of blending together in my mind in terms of what they really are. Let's talk to Adam over at Red Hat. Adam, what are some of the big benefits that you believe your customers will achieve and things you see happening that are truly going to make a difference?
Absolutely. So I think at first blush, capital, right? You hope that your consolidation efforts are leading to capital consolidation, lower spend on hardware, software. But what that means is that I've got more servers in less space, not that I have fewer servers, ultimately with these consolidation efforts. So that what that really, really requires from an operational perspective is standardization, right? We need to make sure that our tooling and that our skills are very, very standardized. So our successful customers have really had a significant maturation of their tool sets and their skills on their IT staff. Standardizing on open platforms like RHEL and JBoss also lead to that. You can, put out requests. You can have third-party vendors. You can have ISVs. All sorts of folks can bring skills to the table around those tools that streamline that process and consolidation.
Yeah, we've had standardizations come now a number of times, and just getting sort of a handle on everything you have, which will make a big difference, I'm sure, over time, being able to manage that stuff. Steve Wallo over at Brocade, what are some of the big benefits that you see that are going to come out of these efforts for the federal government?
Sure. Just to add on to what Adam was saying, when you talk about open standards, that's huge. We see so many times where a customer, they want to move into a different architecture. When you start talking about data center consolidation, a lot of it is you got to clean house, you got to figure out what you have, but you also want to create an environment that's been modernized so that wherever you're landing on is a lot more efficient into the services that you provide. But a lot of customers are kind of locked into these proprietary pieces, whether it's from a server or networking topology. And as people get a chance to reinvent that particular component of their infrastructure, moving to open standards is something that we see a huge benefit from. It allows interoperability. It allows best-of-breed solutions to kind of pull itself into what you're doing inside that architecture.
And you see those kinds of things happening
Oh, yeah,
today?
definitely.
Yeah. Paul, Christman, Dell, what are some of the big benefits that you see accumulating and benefits you see that are going to come out of these data center consolidation and virtualization efforts?
Well, Jim, the idea that we've already touched on is really a process discipline, a reduction in operating expenses because you're able to do or automate routine functions. Frank talked about this idea of changing the mission, changing the ratio of tooth to tail, as they say, putting more people at the tooth and fewer people at the tail. That, I think, is a major benefit, a reduction in OpEx as well as a consolidation, as Adam mentioned, in the CapEx. The other item that we really see is the ability to adhere to frameworks. NIST's critical infrastructure framework that just was published in February talks about all of these processes to improve cybersecurity. But the first thing that they talk about is asset inventory, knowing what you have, not only where your data centers are, but what's inside them, what applications are running. You have to inventory in order to manage. And that whole idea of moving towards asset management, improved cybersecurity posture through all of these frameworks has the intended byproduct of reducing the expenses.
Yeah, excellent. Very good points here. Now let's back up to the question I kind of put out there on the table. And let's start with Frank Konieczny at Air Force again. The idea, we hear data center consolidation, virtualization. Then we hear people talking about we have a cloud strategy. Then we hear people talking about we have a managed services strategy. Then we hear infrastructure as a service strategy. Do you view them as sort of separate programs, or are they all sort of like blending together now and all part of a program? Where I'm going with this, Frank, I mean, we've been talking about those subjects as if they're mutually exclusive. But yet when you think about them, to me, they all sort of just all blend together. You comment on that?
Yeah, we think they're all integrated together because as we progress, I mean, we talked about, we did the standard methodology of how to do this. We're actually standardizing on platforms as a service now across the Air Force. So as we move to a different cloud vendor, we're going to be using the same platform. In fact, we're going to standardize on a platform that's a little more complex than most people realize because we want to incorporate all the security features into that as well, which means scanners, firewalls, everything else into our platform, which is kind of different than most people realize because most of the time you think of a security stack sitting in front of a data center. Well, we want to incorporate the security stack within the virtual data center for that particular application so we can actually move it easily into a commercial space without changing it and keeping our CNA and our capability there. So we're moving down a path of mobility across data centers and standardization at a very high level, which provides us more mission capability, but also decreases the cost because of the standardization of the COTS tools that we have, the licensing structure, and then the maintenance as well. Even if we maintain it ourselves, it's going to be less people than than we want to, than we have now, but we want to outsource as much as possible.
Right. Maybe when we get into the challenges area, we'll talk a little bit about some people issues too, because I'm sure it's making some changes there. But I agree with you. I think that, at first with cloud, there was all this concern about security and, loss of control and so forth and so forth. But the other way to look at that is with these approaches, you have the opportunity to look at a holistic approach. And, my arguments, which I've said many, many times, especially in security, we've been doing Band-Aid fixes for years and years and years and years and years, and now it's a chance to take a look at all those Band-Aids out there and maybe replace them with something that can, do multiple function for those security kinds of issues. Neal, what do you think in terms of the viewing cloud versus managed service versus data center, virtualization, infrastructure as a service? Over the years, we've been talking about those. In fact, on this radio show, we've had separate shows on those separate subjects. And now I'm beginning to think that maybe the time has come where they're really not separate subjects. Any comment that you'd like to make on that?
Well, one of the things that has always fascinated me, that if you put any 5 people in a room, you can usually get 6 or 7 definitions of what cloud is.
That's right.
So what we look at, and you mentioned Band-Aid solutions that have built up over the years, one of the things that we're looking at is taking advantage in this transition period as we move towards that cloud, is choosing amongst those different solutions to find the best way to get ourselves to an end result that really takes advantage of what cloud offers.
Yeah, I know. And people once would say to me, well, we're trying to make our decisions by consensus and go to a consensus approach. And I always held my opinion was if there's more than one person in the discussion, you're probably not going to get consensus on just about any issue. Steve, what do you think? When Brocade looks at it, do you look at data center consolidation, virtualization, managed service, cloud? Do you view them as separate swim lanes for your organization, so to speak? Or you now view it as just one big strategy to address all?
Yeah, so it's really one big strategy. The whole point is that, in order to get to cloud, that's a fundamental paradigm shift in the way that you do business. And managed services provide the means to do that in some cases, because the people that are providing those managed services, that's their discipline. These are the experts that can pull that Band-Aid off and kind of see what's underneath. So when you move into a cloud, you utilize those managed services, and I think that rolls into virtualization and all the things that we're trying to get to. Yeah.
Paul, what do you think? In terms of how does Dell approach that? Do you approach a strategy that incorporates all of these topics, or do you view these topics as separate sort of entities in themselves?
Well, for Dell as a corporation, we have an overarching set of IT business drivers that we see as moving the industry, and that's the industry broadly defined. Could be public sector, could be private sector, but cloud is one of the 3 major disruptive technologies. The other two being big data, as well as mobility. Those 2 other areas are woven through, but the delivery of the services really. Everything comes back to cloud. It comes back to consolidated, virtualized, industry standard, things like OpenStack. All of that's underwoven into the other 2, mobility as well as big data.
Yeah, I guess you can throw mobility in there. Adam, any comment on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Cloud is very real throughout the entire government, but as was alluded to earlier, one of the questions I like to ask my customers is, what does cloud mean to you today? Right? Are you a cloud consumer? Do you need infrastructure? Do you need a platform as a service? Are you a cloud provider? Are you providing software as a service? Right? It's not one size fits all. Right? Clouds need to be very agile. We're fortunate we have NIST to make the definitions for us that we do to help us sort of standardize our approaches to these things. But for example, my friends in energy and at NASA are looking to really leverage OpenStack on bare metal as an infrastructure as a service, right? Well, that's very different from the needs that maybe the FCC has in closing their time to market to bring products to their customers sooner. So clouds need to be malleable and adaptable to those.
Excellent points. And I want to switch. We're going to start talking about some of the tough things, the challenges out there, the things that are difficult or things that need to get done. But before we do that, we need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Neal Shelley from the U.S. Army, Frank Konieczny from the U.S. Air Force, Paul Christman from Dell Software, Adam Clater from Red Hat, and Steve Wallo from Brocade. We're talking data center consolidation. We've talked before during the first segment, we were talking about benefits and progress and all things happening. But I have a feeling that there's a lot more to this and a lot more complexity to working your way through. So let's talk about some of the challenges, some of the things that are difficult day to day that need to be overcome to achieve those goals. Let's start again with Frank at the U.S. Air Force. Frank, what are some of the big challenges you face on a day-to-day basis that you still need to, overcome, work through in order to get where you really want to go with these programs?
Yeah, there's lots of them.
I
mean, it's an understatement, guys. Okay, let's start first. Identification of the applications. We talked about that before. That's always been a problem because not only do we have to do the hardware asset identification, we have to know what's sitting on those assets. Mm-hmm. Because if we try to migrate them and move them into a data center, we have to know everything about them. And also we have to know the connectivity that they have to other applications and other data centers. Because we found it basically in Hill, you just can't move an application and assume that it doesn't have any connectivity because lots of times it's connected either in a synchronous mode at night, mm-hmm. feeding other applications or feeding other databases, or it gets its data in at night. So that's one of the problems. The other problem is, of course, rationalization. We have lots of applications. It's difficult at times to determine what is the best two applications that could be combined into a third one or getting rid of one. There's contractual issues associated with this all the time. And the question always becomes, if I have a developer who's developing an application and it's O&M maintenance right now, mm-hmm. how do I migrate that application? Do I give it to that developer? Do I send it to a migration center? What contractual effort mm-hmm. do I have to change a contract for to support that? Right. I mean, it goes on in the contractual issues of how we want to do this. And so we haven't yet figured out a best method of doing this because it all depends on what the contracts actually say and how you want to change them. There's also testing. Remember, if you move an application, the question is, okay, I have to have dual usage of that application. I have to keep the old one running and the new one going. Sure. I have to test accordingly. I have to bring functional people in. It's an effort. Right. And let's talk the last part, of course. After I get rid of a facility, the government does not get rid of it. Yeah, you're right. They have to refurbish it. They have to repurpose it. Right. And so there's a cost involved with all this. I mean, people think we can just move applications and it's real easy and we close the data center. Right. It doesn't work that way. Right. I mean, they have to be reused for something. Right. Yeah, I've been reading some studies on this just recently. In fact, a couple days, a couple big reports have been done and said that, in the short run, the savings have not materialized as anticipated. But there's still hope that in the long run, they will, because it's sort of intuitively obvious that they will. But because of all these pieces in the middle along the way and these challenges along in the middle, they do have some cost associated with them. It's going to take a while.
Yeah. Neal Shelley, how about over U.S. Army? What are some of the constraints or the difficult things, challenges that you bump into in order to get where you're trying to go with this?
Frank nailed most of the ones that are common to both of us. I'd like to talk about the cultural and psychological issues.
Okay, I like that. I was waiting for someone to bring that up.
The Army is highly decentralized in its delivery of services, primarily because of the way that we fight. And we have to deliver those services to the soldiers in the field. So having control over those services is very important to the commanders.
I can understand that.
So what we're asking for them to do is to trust that we can centralize these things remote from them and still deliver those services. And the holy grail there is an enforceable service level agreement. Right. But we're very fortunate in the Army. General Lawrence, our previous CIO, and General Farrell, our current CIO, have taken a personal interest in data center consolidation and the delivery of services. And on a weekly basis, we report to them on progress. Mm-hmm. And on a quarterly basis, we bring together the commands virtually so that they can talk to the CIO and explain what they've accomplished in the last 90 days, what they're going to try to accomplish in the next 90 days. And that kind of command emphasis has been a significant advantage to us.
Yeah, it sounds like leadership to me. Having leadership that is concerned and involved and makes their presence known to keep the heat, the pressure on to get things done, but also letting the team know that the leadership's behind you is so important. And I'm glad you brought up culture. 104 shows now, and in 104th time, someone has brought up culture being some of the tough issues to work through, because I'm sure there's people changes, and people just by nature are used to doing the job a certain way, and when you're asking them to do it a little different, it creates some challenges. Let's go to Steve over at Brocade. What are some of the challenges you're seeing your customers facing, and challenges maybe that you're having working with customers to get where you're trying to go with all this?
Sure. So I think Neal was actually looking at my notes, because the culture thing is one of the biggest concerns that we see, and it's really from the people that have the boots in the ground. You know, the upper management has a great philosophy of what they want to move and why, and some of the things that you mentioned about having the meetings and being able to, you know, communicate with the people that are doing the work, or at least the people that are affected from the application side, is huge, because if you don't get that buy-in at the ground level, then it really just doesn't work. The other piece of that is the metrics part of it. So just because we've moved an application or a service, that doesn't necessarily mean that it worked. It worked to the extent where somebody is happy with the result. And you know, a lot of times we see, you know, yes, we've moved this, we've closed this data center, or you know, we've met our mission. However, that the guys that are using that service are still wondering where it went, why doesn't it work the way it's supposed to, or that it worked differently than it used to in the past. And I think just getting that piece put back together in that communication cycle and that feedback loop is a big challenge.
Right. Well said. Paul, Christman, what do you think? Paul, what are some of the tough things, you know, the things that you see that you're struggling with your customers maybe, or things that are, you know, you really want to, you know, you need to get done and over this hump in order to get where you want to go with all this?
Well, I'm going to separate it out into two different categories. One of them is a technology challenge that was sort of unseen when we started moving into these consolidated data centers and implementing private clouds. One of the things that we've seen is the idea of a cloud infrastructure as a natural byproduct of a virtualized consolidated data center. That all makes sense. The problem is a lot of agencies have now found themselves into vendor lock-in. And the idea, I think, that Frank was mentioning before about making this cloud or consolidated data center virtualized, but also portable, so you don't get into vendor lock-in. The idea of having the ability to move between cloud providers, whether it's a private cloud internally, or maybe in the case of moving to DISA for a DoD customer, but that idea of portability and the idea of being able to have multiple cloud providers, whether they're public or private, that's a big challenge, because without portability, you get vendor lock-in. Vendor lock-in, you tend to get bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy serves itself. So that's a big sort of technical issue that folks are struggling with now. The second is financial. Just as big as social and psychological, the budget issues are enormous. The procurement methodology for buying things is not the same as buying services. And really what we're moving towards is an IT as a service model, platform as a service, something as a service. So the idea of buying using outdated procurement methodologies is really hampering a lot of forward thinking. And finally, the ability to repurpose budget that is recovered. I've never known a cost recovery model that gives the money back to the people who recovered the cost. Yeah. And the problem is it all goes back to the house. And if that's the case, there's a natural disincentive to change. And until we get the ability to recover budget as well as recolor money, the cost recovery is going to be either disincented or it's going to be hidden.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. You know, how do we create incentives for, you know, CIOs or agencies to really try to reduce and save the money, especially when in times you'll have OMB has already factored into the long-term budget the savings, that potential that they believe you will achieve, so the money's already disappearing down the road. So you're right. I think incentive is something that would be good to put up on the table, you know, where you could, if you actually save the money, you can reinvest it in other IT solutions would be certainly something that to be thought about there. Adam Clater over at Red Hat, what are some of the big challenges you see? Now, yeah, I mean, Paul talked about, you know, vendor lock-in. I would think, in my mind anyway, Red Hat, when open source approaches are all about trying to move away from vendor lock-in. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but What do you see as some of the big challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, workloads are incredibly diverse within the data center. And so Frank spoke earlier about this idea of forklifting an application into a new data center or forklifting something into a cloud. Not really effective, right? Lots of applications need to be rewritten, retooled, rethought, refactored about how they're actually going to work inside of that cloud infrastructure. So simply forklifting onto a cloud infrastructure is not going to achieve what you want. In fact, it may be the exact opposite. You might have been better off just leaving that application on a server on the data center floor, right?
Exactly.
So that is a significant challenge. We see customers constantly having to evaluate that retooling of applications. As far as vendor locking goes and cloud portability, as diverse as the workloads are going to be, clouds are going to have to be diverse to respond to them as well, right? You're going to have shared clouds, you're going to have public clouds, you're going to have private clouds, you're going to have the C2Ss of the world, right? Here's our public-private cloud. Having tooling, having brokerages that go across those that allow you to have chargeback models, that allow you to have a single pane of glass across all of those. This is a very, very big concern for my customers today.
Yeah.
We try to address it with some of our tooling. I know there are lots of folks who are as well. I see that as being a big challenge moving forward.
Yeah, and it's, Paul brought up the financing thing too. And, I've seen a lot of very good success stories. I've seen a lot of stories that, the agencies feel like they're probably worse off today than they were when they began this process.
That's
now,
right.
Hopefully it changes over time, but I won't name names, of course, or agencies, but I know some that, began moving the forklift approach, moved some stuff to a new center, but then didn't have the funds to move everything that was in the old center, so now they're operating two centers. Right. Whereas before they had one. Things like that you hear and you just shake your head that, somebody didn't, the planning process didn't go right.
Equally important in a cloud strategy and how you're moving to cloud is how you're moving out of a cloud, right? If you don't have a strategy for getting out of your cloud provider, the day that you move in, you're going to be locked in. Cloud lock-in, if you think vendor lock-in today is bad, cloud lock-in is even worse. Where on their website do you click a button in their shopping cart to buy a hard drive and have them ship your data to you, right? You can't do it. Right? So once your data's there and your application's there, you're locked into that cloud. Very, very scary. So you must have an exit strategy when you move to cloud.
Yeah, these are very, very good points. Very, very good points. We need to start socializing around town here as, I don't know if we call them best practices or maybe practices you want to avoid. But very good points, guys. Let's talk a little bit about energy. I guess a couple years back, go green was like the topic, and people wanted to become the green company and everything else. And truly, there are the energy savings that are on the table here. But when you're looking at your strategies for data center and all, is that factored in? Are you working that? And I know in government, sometimes the energy side of the equation is like a facilities group as opposed to an IT group. So is there a coordination there? Neal, the U.S. Army, are you looking at energy consumption and potential savings in that vein as you go through these programs?
Very much so. Part of the problem that we have is that, as you pointed out, the folks who are running the computers are not necessarily worried about the cost of the electricity. And so the Army is making an effort now to meter the data centers. Up until now, what we've had to do is to estimate the amount of energy savings we get from a data center closure based on a model we have on what was in the data center and where they were located. But as this develops over the next couple of years, our major data centers will be metered. We will be able to look at how much the proposed changes would actually generate in terms of energy savings. By closing data centers, we estimate we've saved over $800,000 a year in energy so far.
Oh, wow. And there's some really cool stuff. I saw some really cool stuff, no pun intended, cool stuff. But in the air conditioning world these days, there's all kinds of new technologies coming out. I was briefed the other day on one that has no air conditioners at all in the data center. They just have cooling plates that go on the actual devices, which are much more efficient, create more space, and reduce costs dramatically. So there's a lot of neat things coming in that area that hopefully when you're going through the process, you're looking at not just what are we doing in terms of modernizing our IT equipment, but also all of the surrounding, things that need to go along with that data center. Frank, what do you think when it comes to the energy side of the house? Is that something that's a priority with the data center consolidation?
We consider it as part of the data center consolidation. I mean, the problem we have is just like what Neal said. It's the data center is sitting on a base, and it's very difficult to meter the electricity on a base just for that data center. So lots of it's been estimated. What's interesting is that Hill, when we did Hill, we actually did monitor it, and they're saving $457,000 a year just by themselves. So we know there's a great deal of savings that we can have by looking at energy sources. The other problem we have is that as we progress down the path of consolidation, we looked at various energy efficiency from the DOE standpoint, and the problem is that they always want to project ahead how big the data center is going to be for 5 years. And that's really hard for us because we don't really know.
Right.
And so to get savings back in the energy programs, you have to look too far ahead a lot of times to figure out what's happening. And so we've been kind of hesitant as going down that path, because if we decide all of a sudden that, oh, we really need to close that data center after we tell everybody we're going to keep it for 5 years, we're locked into a situation again where we have to get out of it.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult situation.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me, too, there's something out there called energy savings performance contracting. And, and I'm always curious because for years, the facilities people have been using it for thousands of times. And in actuality, it allows the government to go ahead and implement things without paying for it right now. I mean, the energy companies fund the cost of the upgrades, and then to simplify the process, the government just keeps paying its standard bill. The energy company then recoups it through energy savings cost, and then eventually the savings are passed on to the government. So there are ways to get it done. And I always wonder why more government agencies aren't looking at those kinds of approaches. And I think my own scientific research, which is talking to a couple people, I've come to the conclusion that it's just so different. It's just such a different way to do things that the procurement folks and acquisition folks are not used to doing these energy savings kinds of programs.
We've looked at the programs, and we were talking about actually doing one of them. But again, we could not figure out how long we were going to have, what size the data center was going to be, and how long we were going to actually keep the data center.
Yeah. The other thing too, I think that's been a little bit of a challenge is to really have a chance to do it right. You have to baseline your cost, and like Neal said, in the past we haven't done a good job with the metering and things like that. So in some cases, it's difficult to baseline what your current cost is to be able to truly measure then your savings over time. So interesting things. I want to hear from our industry guests too about the energy side of this equation. Maybe a little bit about touch a little bit on the security thing, but we need to first take a break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Neal Shelley from the U.S. Army, Frank Konieczny from the U.S. Air Force, Paul Christman from Dell Software, Public Sector, Adam Clater from Red Hat, and Steve Wallo from Brocade. We're talking data center consolidation. We went to break. We heard from our government guest here about how energy savings are being looked at and potentially factored into some of these strategies. How about over in the private sector side? Let's start with Adam this time. Adam, over at Red Hat, is energy and energy efficiency, is that something that you factor into your strategy? And if so, how do you look at that kind of a equation and potential savings?
Yeah, absolutely. So you've heard our customers at the table say how important it is to them and the significant savings that they've seen from that, which we think is great. Linux is really a partner-based ecosystem, right? And that partnership applies. I can say every agency represented here or commercial partner represented here has made a contribution to Linux or an open source project, right? So this ecosystem is growing and growing and growing. But that also includes other partners, right? Like Google and Samsung, who are really, really optimizing the Android operating system for battery savings for the device inside of your phone. Those get reincorporated into the Linux kernel as well, right? So the optimizations that we're making in mobile for battery are being applied down to the operating systems for enterprise customers as well, right? So with RHEL 7, we've got a lot of significant energy-saving capabilities. What we really see, though, is sort of moving from the virtualization consolidation, where you would see a factor of about 10 to 1 servers onto a virtual server implementation, to the containerized implementation, where we can get 100 to 1 applications onto a server or virtual instance, and really, really, really drive down that power utilization. So it's exciting.
Yeah. Batteries have long been an issue, with just about, I remember my days running Secret Service communication at the land mobile radio. That battery was big and it didn't last, had to be recharged, on and on and on and on. And so that energy issue, whether it's batteries or electricity or whatever, it's been out there for a long time as something that the technology needs to evolve with the technology. Steve, Wallo over at Brocade, how about energy efficiency and how that might factor into your data center approaches?
Sure. I mean, that is huge for Brocade. It's one of our driving factors going forward for what we offer to the community. And I've been to places where you want to demonstrate a technology, and you go to the shop and you go to plug it in, and you just can't because there just is no more power.
Right.
And they are literally making deals with their neighbors across the street to use some of their power, and that's how they're continuing forward. You can have the greatest solution, a great Dell box running Red Hat plugged into a Brocade network, but if you don't have the power to do that, it's not going to buy you anything. It's kind of like a Ferrari with no gas. So you want to make sure that power is constantly on your mind. Now, one of the other things we talk about, I can pull out my cell phone. I can say, hey, this uses less power than this server, but it doesn't do any work. So it's not just that you're saving money in terms of power and cooling, but that whatever you're putting in there provides a lot more work in terms of what it's doing. And that's something that we have to make sure that we keep in mind as we're going forward. It's not just energy savings, but it's being able to do more work with a given amount of energy that you have.
Yeah, terrific. Paul, Christman, what do you think at Dell? How's energy figure into some of your strategies and thought processes as you're looking to support your customers in the data center world?
Well, Dell as a corporation takes a bit of a broader approach, and one of the things that we as a company look at is the environmental impact of IT. Mm-hmm. And energy certainly is one of those, but we think of it as a life cycle. That's the manufacture, the use, where the energy actually comes in, and then also the disposal. So Dell as a company has a series of corporate initiatives to both make more responsible manufacturing choices, everything from what goes into the components to how is it packaged and shipped, through energy cost reductions in the use of the technology during its life cycle, and then finally, how is it disposed? All of those things we think go into the idea of an environmental impact. And energy, both the production of it and the carbon footprint that goes into it, but also the cost of it, all of that gets factored into our design decisions across the entire corporation.
Yeah, so for you, it's sort of just a standard process that's already baked into the whole life cycle of everything you're doing.
And we call it offer life cycle management. And whatever we offer to the marketplace has to have this factored into its design from conception all the way through to retirement.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Let's talk just briefly. We brought up earlier about the Band-Aids for security and security itself. Frank Konieczny at Air Force, have these moves towards data center and cloud and things like that, has that changed how you have to view that security question for?
Yes, of course. Because that's why we talked about the virtual data center. It had all the security components within it, and that we want to move it. Because we found that the servers, security servers that are sitting in DISA, for example, are not the security servers that are sitting at Amazon.
Right.
And they're not going to be that way.
Right.
And so we can't expect the same security level that we have in a DISA facility to be in any of the commercial facilities. Mm-hmm. So therefore, we're changing the paradigm now to talk about the virtual data center by application level, which has all the security packaged into it. So we can move it anywhere we want to move it, even on an application and an Air Force base, we want to move it there.
Sure.
So we're looking at bare infrastructure as a service anywhere as the baseline, and moving our virtual data center concept for the application anywhere we want to move it.
Mm-hmm. Neal, does this strategy require you to look at security a little different?
Very much so. Like Frank, similar concerns. We also look at how we do security today, and very often it's layers upon layers upon layers of firewalls, right, which severely restrict your ability to manage centrally, to ensure that there are standard configurations out there, and to monitor properly. So we're trying to come up with we, the DoD, are coming up with a standard architecture for security which will allow to do the centralized management.
Yeah. Very good, very good. Yeah, and you guys brought up, you mentioned Amazon. Remember Amazon used to sell books? You remember? And Google used to have a search engine, and Microsoft had an operating system. And you brought up the term firewall. I know I've joked before that it's too bad the term firewall even exists. Because if we would have built the systems to be secure in the first place, we wouldn't need firewalls to protect the systems from the outside world. We're down to about 11 minutes to go in the show, and we always like to talk about looking out to the future, about where all this is going and where we think it will take us down the road. Will the world look different because of these efforts down the road? Will government processes work different down the road? And I'd like to hear from all of our panelists sort of your view of the future of where we're going. Let's start with Steve Wallo over at Brocade. Steve, where's this all going? What's this look like, and what kinds of changes can we expect in your crystal ball coming down the road as a result of these efforts that are going on today?
Sure. I think one of the biggest things looking forward is that we make infrastructures for a living, and instead of creating infrastructure that has kind of a siloed approach, I think what you're going to see in the future is that the whole enterprise is reacting within itself, within each other, where the network is responding to what's happening from the storage side or the server side. And with new technologies, things like Open Daylight or OpenStack, where you're getting visibility at a higher level, I think what you're going to see now is that the whole enterprise can react to an event. So if there's a denial of service, or there's a failure in the infrastructure somewhere, somebody can't get to their application, I think what you're going to see is an automated approach where all of a sudden something catches that, and it's able to tell the enterprise to adjust accordingly. And it's not just that the network changes, it's not just that the servers or the storage change or even the application changes, but they're all working in conjunction with each other. And I think being able to provide that holistic approach to the enterprise is something that's going to be, pretty big going in the future.
Yeah, sounds exciting. It sounds a little bit like HAL in 2001. So kind of software defined, but smart networks that are able to be resilient in and of themselves. Adam Clater at Red Hat, what do you see as, what's it look like down the road as all this work we're doing, all this energy around this, what's it going to lead to down the road?
Yeah, so one of the things that I was thinking about is, virtualization once upon a time wasn't actually very interesting. When you only had single core processors, virtualization was not fun for anyone. It was very taxing on a system to run. Suddenly, when we have these much more capable multi-core processors from Intel and AMD, we have the capability to start putting more and more system images on a single machine. So that's been just single core, just virtualization by themselves, not a lot. You pull them together, they've changed our entire industry, right? So I think what's interesting now is you see these system on a chip type of designs. Raspberry Pi, for example, was really a hobbyist toy. Some of us have them at home. You mess around with them. They're interesting. You run Linux on them. They're fun. But I think Intel's taking a very serious look at that now with their Edison project, right? And what's interesting about this is all of these innovations, whether they're virtualization or whether it's this hardware platform and these open hardware platforms, they're happening in very, very open sourcey kinds of ways. They're happening with partnerships across industry. I think those kinds of partnerships are going to continue to strengthen and evolve. I think what that's going to lead to, I hope, is some significant cost reduction for our government customers. I think that we have the opportunity for agencies to be much, much more responsive on their mission, whether that is energy or the Air Force. We really need to drive through those efficiencies. I really hope we're getting there.
Yeah, terrific. Well said. Well said. Paul Christman, what's it look like to you, Paul? Where's this all going down the road?
I'm going to give you three things. One, the lead, I'm sorry, is going to actually be negative. Procurement is still going to be a problem. Procurement is still going to be a problem, and until we pass legislation to make this procurement more flexible and more responsive and more modern, it will continue to impede the rapid rate of technology adoption.
Everywhere I go, I hear that.
I'm sorry.
Everyone's talking about we need people to do something.
Well, we need. It's when we get legislators involved. Unfortunately, we move a little slower than we'd like. Second is, I think we're going to see software-defined X. Whatever X is, I think you've touched on it before. It used to be software-defined storage, software-defined networking. It's going to be pervasive, and I don't say that just because my group is responsible for the software side of Dell, but I think that the idea of flexibility has to move us away from this hardware-centric world where you put something in place and it performs one function. So software-defined X. And lastly, I think we're going to get to X as a service. So it's going to be different metering, different chargeback, different all of those different attributes. It's going to be X as a service. And I think one of the interesting things over the next couple of years is to try and figure out what can be delivered as a service that today we don't think could ever be delivered as a service. Right. And touching on things like identity as a service, sure. That's certainly becoming more prevalent. We never thought we could decouple the identity from the application, and now we are. Yeah. And being able to see that as a service that can be reused as a component in other areas.
Yeah, excellent point. Excellent point. It's amazing what today we didn't envision 5 years ago. So who knows what's going to be 5 years from now that we didn't envision today. Neal, Shelley, U.S. Army, what's it look like to you? Where's this all going? What's the sort of the end state beginning to look like down the road?
In DoD, we really focus on delivery of services to the soldiers and the civilians, and often that means we aren't as concerned about the cost of delivering those services because we don't necessarily write an accurate check to run that application or to run that data center.
Right.
I think as we go further down this road, we are going to have to, and we are going to have a better understanding of what is the true cost of running an application or running a data center. And as we start wanting to take advantage of our commercial brethren to do some of this data processing, we're going to need to know what our application is going to cost when we take it out there, and how much does it cost us today where we're running it. So getting a handle on true cost and equating or balancing dollars versus services is going to become critical.
Yeah, and actually might become something that needs to be done. I mean, there's been a lot of energy on in the legislature about Data Act and things like that, more cost transparency about what the true costs are. So I think there could be things coming that are going to actually push agencies in that direction. Frank Konieczny at Air Force. What's it look like for you, Frank? As a result of this work going on today, what's that going to look like in terms of a changing landscape down the road?
I think we believe we're going to have resilient commoditization across the board, meaning that we can go anywhere to do our job, and that's what we want to do. We want to be able to buy software, we want to buy processing, we want to buy storage as a commoditization, but we want to be resilient. This has to be the case, and we've talked about this before in many cases, that if I put my application in a particular data center, I don't care where it is, I may have to have an SLA that says it automatically has to move to another data center if the data center goes down. Right. And this has not been thought about before. Because now if we put things in commercial that we don't trust, or we trust less, let's put it that way, sure. We're going to have that issue. And on top of that, we always wanted to push toward the mission. You know, as Neal said, mission is our goal. Efficiency is our less goal, but we still have to have it. But that's our push. We have to have the mission and the airmen doing the work they're supposed to be doing as opposed to managing data centers.
Yeah. So you got to focus on the result and the results you're trying to get as opposed to how you get the result. You want to focus on what that mission result is going to be down the road. Well said, well put. Let me try to do a little bit of summarizing here. We've had so much great content today. I mean, this was a fantastic panel and getting some things out. I think a couple of things I picked up on is when we were talking about examples, I think what related to me very well is striving the fact that you need to focus on processes first and get the pieces in place first. This isn't just about moving a box from one location to the other. There's a lot of planning that needs to be in there, and the examples we heard of positive stories included that planning being well done and the modernization as we go. Benefits, one thing came out of the box is that knowing what you have is a big benefit, both from a hardware standpoint as well as your applications inventory and working that. Clearly the benefits we're hoping to achieve are lower spend, but in getting there, I think the standardization issue came out, the fact that standardization itself is going to provide a tremendous amount of benefits and flexibility for IT organizations to be able to do a lot more things in the future and to avoid what we heard before being a problem, and that is the lock-in issue. You want to keep yourself from being locked into just one solution. We all agreed, I think, with violent agreement that cloud, managed services, virtualization, data center consolidation really now are all blended, and it's sort of just one kind of process. You need to think of them as interrelated and not as separate programs themselves. In terms of challenges, we heard just identifying the applications that are out there and then making decisions about which ones really you want to move forward, which ones do you want to perhaps get rid of, which ones could be melded together with other ones, those kinds of decisions being a real challenge in day-to-day. We talked about contractual issues in procurement. It's one that this is different from traditional kinds of procurements. This is procuring services in many cases. This is procuring results. This is not necessarily procuring a thing or buying a box, so to speak. So there are a lot of challenges there. And of course, what came out very strong in the challenge side was the culture issues. You're talking about doing things differently. You're talking about people doing different things differently, and that's going to create some workplace kinds of issues that need to be dealt with. Energy savings remain high on priorities for what people are looking at, and in the future, we're looking down towards smart software-defined networks, and I like the resilient networks that the network itself will be able to adjust and be able to do the kinds of things that need to be done, and you'll be able to work from anywhere, any place, and still have the full capabilities that you have today. Some great content there. I'd like to turn now and say thank you to our panelists for taking time from your busy schedule to be with us here today. Thanks to our sponsors, without which we don't have the show, so thank you very much. Thanks to the good people here at Federal News Radio for the accommodations and all the great work they do. And most importantly, thanks to our listening audience out there that tune into the show. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM.